Thank you all for joining us today for our third learning workshop and our first out of two about adaptations. I'm KATELYN, and I'll be your main speaker for today's workshop, which we're going to divide into three parts. And the first we'll spend discussing what adaptations are, common occurrences that lead to them, and a few best practice models to consider. And then towards the middle-ish of the workshop around 11:40, we'll break into smaller groups and go into breakout rooms where you'll discuss the ins and outs of a presented adaptation using the traffic light model, which we'll discuss shortly. And at the end, we will come back together as a group to discuss any feedback you have and wrap up our discussion with suggestions on documenting and evaluating your programs and give you some best practice models to keep in mind. So for those of you who I haven't met, I'm KATELYN Dame. I use she, her pronouns, and I will be your main speaker for today. I received my master's here at CSU in prevention science, and I'm happy to be continuing my journey here at the Prevention Research Center, or PRC as we commonly refer to it, as your main point of contact for this grant. So please feel free to reach out to me with any questions or concerns you may have. My email is shown here, and Nikki has also provided it in the chat for you. And now off to Dave.
Hi, I'm David MacPhee. I'm a professor emeritus in human development and family studies, he, his, him. I also have a couple of feet in both the Colorado School of Public Health and the School of Social Work here. My title in the Prevention Research Center is the Director of Community University Partnerships, and my life's career has been devoted to risk and resilience and doing a whole lot of community engaged partnership around program evaluation and some program planning as well. And I am guilty of writing the first couple of chapters of the manual that you might have read. So if it's uninterpretable, that's my fault. And Nikki, I think, is next.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I am NIKKI MINGOLA. I use she, her pronouns, and I also am a research associate here at the PRC at CSU. And like the rest of us on this call today, KATELYN and Dave and myself are all part of the Research to Practice team at the Research Center. So this has been really fun work, not only researching and finding research-informed best practices on adaptations, but also connecting with all of you, our communities, our implementation teams around Colorado. So this work has been really engaging, and we're really trying to get all aspects of what make adaptations work. I also got my master's in prevention science here at CSU, like KATELYN. But yeah, nice to see some familiar people joining today. I will again be the moderator for the workshop today. So if there's any way I can maybe make this go smoothly for you, just send me a chat. And back to you, KATELYN.
Thanks, Nikki. Okay, so just to kind of give you a brief overview of how the PRC kind of fits in with CDPHE and our partnership on this substance abuse block grant. We are here to provide you all with technical assistance on implementing programs with fidelity, which was covered in our previous learning workshop that you can find on YouTube, adapting programs according to community needs and best practices, and with establishing monitoring or methods for monitoring your implementation and adaptations. And we're really happy to fulfill this goal for you by providing several opportunities, which I'll be discussing more about towards the end of today's workshop. So now that we're done with introductions, let's get started with a little icebreaker.
So to make up for the Zoom polling portion of this workshop, we ask that you please now pause the video and take a minute or so to consider your answers to the following questions. Please rate your level of frustration when deciding upon and implementing adaptations, which are modifications or changes, to the programs your organization is implementing. Would you rate your level of frustration as not at all frustrated, somewhat frustrated, often more frustrated than not, very frustrated, or extremely frustrated? Then consider the next question. If your implementation team has made program adaptations, do you feel that the changes enhance program outcomes and/or goals? Yes, somewhat. However, new unique challenges have also arisen. No, changes have not impacted program outcomes or goals at all. or no, our program changes have impacted outcomes or goals in a negative way, or I'm not sure, we're not implementing adaptations to our programs. So please take a moment now to pause the video and consider how you would answer these questions.
What are adaptations? Put simply, they are any type of change made to an evidence-based program, but more thoroughly, they are modifications made by implementing staff, often to improve program participant fit, that deviate from the program manual or program statistics. Any change made to any element of a program before, during, or after program implementation is considered an adaptation. And despite this debate between strict fidelity versus adaptation, changes to programs are actually quite common when interventions are implemented in real-world settings. As a matter of fact, adaptation tends to be the rule rather than the exception when implementing programs in real-world contexts. And statistics from evidence-based literature show that 44% of communities that were implementing a state-funded evidence-based program made adaptations. And in a study analyzing adaptations made by teachers, it was found that 68% of teachers implementing the program reported adaptations. However, 97% of session observers reported that adaptations were made. And additionally, another study found that observers reported that 100% of program implementers made adaptations to their programs. And these statistics have really led researchers to debate over strict fidelity to program implementation versus making these needed adaptations to programs to meet communities' needs. But on the adaptation side of the debate, those often argue that in order to fully appreciate and honor the context of local implementation, adaptation may actually be advantageous, because really the diversity of our society calls for this need to adapt. However, it's also extremely important to note that not all adaptations should be created equally. There are many considerations to take into account before making any adaptations, and not all adaptations are guaranteed to retain or increase program effects. In fact, some adaptations can even be harmful or decrease program impact. And it has been estimated that roughly 2/3 of all adaptations to evidence-based programs decrease program effectiveness. However, when implementers make fewer adaptations and ensure that they are following the best practices that we'll be discussing here today, they are more likely to maintain positive program outcomes. So because of this, we here at the PRC believe that the focus should be on how to best plan for, manage, and document your program adaptations instead of completely avoiding them. But how should you and your team go about deciding upon planning and implementing adaptations? To start, before making an adaptation, it's important to understand in what ways programs are most commonly adapted. And research cites that adaptations to programs' content, delivery, and dosage are cited more often, and they're actually quite common when implementing programs in real-world settings. And a common example of content changes are facilitators deciding to add, supplement, or altogether omit program content. Additionally, modifications to how the program is received by participants is also frequently cited. So, for example, the program's facilitator, location, or method of content delivery may be adapted according to resource ability or other organizational needs. And dosage is also another element of program fidelity frequently associated with adaptations. And this may include altering the number or length of program sessions or lessons by, for example, providing a higher dosage of content and activities for some subgroups of individuals who may benefit from that added material.
So to make up for the small in-person discussion portion of this workshop, we ask that you pause the video now and write down a few words responding to the following question. What are some reasons you have found for needing to adapt your programs? If you are not currently adapting a program, think of some reasons that may cause adaptations to evidence-based programs in general, and record your response to that instead.
The most frequent reason that facilitators cite for deleting or changing program materials is because they ran out of time, or they have competing time demands. And this is mainly because organizations are typically focused on more than implementing one goal or program. And so this causes programs to compete for time and resources. And furthermore, when you're implementing programs in local community settings, this typically takes more time than implementing the programs under ideal study conditions, especially when you start to consider the time that it may take to complete those pre and post evaluations. So that's a big one that we'll hopefully tackle today. Difficulty engaging, recruiting, and retaining participants or participant dissatisfaction are other causes that commonly lead to program adaptations, in addition to outdated program content. And this is actually a comment that we have received from many of you about the programs that you're currently implementing. And as I mentioned to those of you who attended the Implementation Fidelity workshop, we highly encourage you to check out your program's website to see if they provide suggestions for updating program content. Specifically, I do know that that Botvin's Life Skills Training website includes information about updating many of the lessons included in the program, and NIKKI has posted this resource for you into the chat for any of you who may need it. A lack of community fit, or a lack of fit with community needs, rather, is often another reason cited for changes to program content. And this is something that we'll discuss more about in our upcoming learning workshop, Adaptations Part 2. But additionally, the traffic light model for adaptations that we'll discuss shortly will also assist you with making these decisions. Responding to individual needs is another one, commonly associated with the need to clarify or define program content and ensure that the material is relevant to program participants, which you mentioned. There is also consistent concern of limited resources. However, this issue may be solved by forming partnerships with local organizations who have accesses to the resources you need. Or you may also consider working with or forming a local coalition. And if you do consider doing this, we have also created several different research to practice tools on this that are housed on the implementation toolbox. Resistance from program implementers is another thing commonly associated with program adaptations. And alongside this is difficulty finding adequate staff. It is important to remember that local program facilitators may be less experienced with the program's material than the research-trained facilitators, so this may require additional training and more time to implement the program as intended. And finally, needing a more culturally appropriate program or a program with more developmentally appropriate material are other commonly cited reasons, which we'll get to in our next workshop. But how do these changes to evidence-based programs and their components impact implementation fidelity? As a quick review from our previous learning workshop, the 5 components of fidelity are adherence, exposure, dosage, quality of delivery, participant responsiveness, and program differentiation. And I'm not going to spend too much time talking about these concepts today, but if you would like to review them, again, check out YouTube for our learning workshop number 2 on implementation fidelity. So essentially, you all know that evidence-based programs are theoretically sound, research-based interventions that have been thoroughly evaluated and continuously demonstrate significant improvements in their targeted outcomes. Specifically, the blueprint programs that you are all utilizing have been held to the highest standard of scientific testing and controlled program replication. And this is even true when they're implemented in multiple naturalistic settings. So each of these programs has a specified theory of change that describes the common outcomes that are expected to follow when the critical components are enacted as prescribed, and a specified logic model, which is a visual representation of the theory of change and how a program's components are linked to both these long and short-term outcomes. So how could changes to the program impact its outcomes, goals, and effectiveness? Unfortunately, adaptation can sometimes threaten the effectiveness of programs. Because evidence-based programs have been tested under strict guidelines and deviations from fidelity are not tested, we cannot be reasonably sure how these changes will impact the program and its overall outcomes. However, as previously mentioned, our unique communities and their members often require tweaks to evidence-based programs, and you as implementers have a special appreciation and knowledge for your local context that can support fidelity to implementation and program outcomes. Which is why, if program changes are implemented with care, caution, and knowledge, adaptations do have the potential to enhance the desired outcomes. But balancing fidelity and adaptation can be complicated and at times frustrating. Which is why we have selected a few evidence-based best practice models for adaptation to share with you today. And we'll first start out with some adaptation taxonomy, which will provide you with some ways of classifying your adaptations and assist you with making sound decisions that will hopefully add to but not subtract from program outcomes. And the adaptation taxonomy model contains 3 key elements, which is fit, timing, and balance. So first, there is a difference between philosophical fit and logistical fit. And philosophical fit refers to programs that have conceptual models that do not align with either the practitioners or the implementing organization's views about the causes for maladaptive behaviors or how to address them. And about 33% of adaptations to evidence-based programs are made due to a lack of philosophical fit. Then there's logistical fit, which is responsible for about 67% of program adaptations. And logistical issues most commonly relate to the agency's capacity. And this can include the number of resources or the amount of time that the implementing organization has available. So asking yourself, does the program fit overall within the capacity of the organization is an important consideration. For example, does a 2-hour per day implementation program meet the organization's available resources and time available? And what's really important to note here is that over 50% of program adaptations are made as a result of issues related to logistical fit. So the next way to classify your adaptations, according to the taxonomy model, is through timing, which classifies adaptations as either reactive or proactive. And reactive adaptations are the most common type that are associated with issues related to logistical fit that we just discussed. And these type of adaptations consist of unplanned changes to the elements of the intervention. And these often occur due to unanticipated obstacles, such as pressure from the organization to reduce program time, or maybe difficulty recruiting from the population. But most importantly, reactive adaptations are not typically aligned with and often deviate from the program's goals or theory and logic model, which, as we will discuss soon, is a red light change that should be avoided if possible. Alternatively, proactive adaptations are purposeful changes to improve the fit between the intervention and the context, and they are planned with the intention of retaining fidelity to program implementation. And these types of adaptations really try to anticipate potential problems before implementation begins. And ideally, any and all adaptations made to your programs are done so proactively and planned as a team prior to implementation. And then the third and final adaptation classification for the taxonomy model is VALENCE, or more simply, does the program's theory fit with your organization, participants, and context? And this concept really focuses on whether your adaptation aligns or misaligns with the program's original model and theory of change. And VALENCE can be either negative, which occurs when the adaptation starts to deviate away from that program theory, and this can have harmful effects, as we'll come to discuss. Or VALENCE can be positive, in which adaptations really align with the program's goals, theory of change, and logic model. Or your adaptations could have a neutral valence, where they don't necessarily align, but they also don't deviate from the program theory or goals. And using your program's specified logic model and referring to its theory of change is the best way to measure and determine how well your changes align with or deviate from the program's overall goals. And it's important to remember that adaptations made proactively are more likely to maintain this positive balance, whereas adaptations made reactively are more likely to result in negative balance. So that's it for the very brief overview of adaptation taxonomy. You may find more information about this in the Implementation and Adaptation Guidebook that we'll be posting soon to the toolbox. But for now, does anyone have any questions about these concepts? Great, we'll keep going. So next up, we'll be discussing the Common Sense Cookery Book Plain Cake with Variations recipe and its relation to program adaptation. And I do have to warn you that the next few slides will definitely entice any of you who have a sweet tooth. So if you have any chocolate or another sweet of choice nearby, I highly recommend having it on hand. So some of you may know about or have even used the Common Sense Cookery Book, which is a simple cookbook that provides basic recipes for beginner cooks. And in this book, there's a recipe for a basic plain cake that includes both a core recipe and plain variations. And researchers implementing a maternal early childhood program across multiple sites in 3 different countries adapted this recipe to create an analogy for proper implementation of evidence-based programs. And what resulted was a recipe that describes the core elements of evidence-based programs that should be replicated with as few, if any, changes, as well as acceptable adaptations to the recipe or program that must enhance but not alter the core components. And as you can see, this recipe consists of core ingredients, a core method, core equipment, and variations based in common sense, which, as the authors point out, common sense is just good sense and sound judgment when making decisions. And similar to when you're baking a cake, the first step is to ensure that you have gathered all the necessary ingredients and tools to complete the cooking method. So core ingredients for a cake, as you know, often include flour, eggs, and sugar, without which the cake will not produce the desired outcomes or taste. But for evidence-based programs, core ingredients are what make the program work. And this often includes the program's core components, like that theory of change and logic model that we just discussed, and the processes that are required for producing the desired outcomes. So the theory of change, facilitator roles, and location. And ideally, implementing sites will have ensured in advance of implementing the program that they can sustainably access these needed resources. And then next, there is the core method, which when baking a cake may include how to mix the ingredients, how long to bake the cake, what temperature is best for what pan, and so on. And like these methods for baking a cake, when you're implementing an evidence-based program, the method of how, when, and why it works has been tested and proven. So changing these things up could negatively impact results. And some examples of core methods of an evidence-based program may include the program delivery methods, the dosage, assigned activities, or implementer participant rapport. And any adaptations to these methods should be approached delicately and with caution. Just as it matters when you're adding the eggs or wet ingredients to the dry ingredients when making a cake, it also matters when a program is delivered. So please try to deliver all of your programs and activities at the prescribed times and duration. Then next we have the core equipment, which when baking a cake may be a spatula, a mixer, size of the baking pan. But for evidence-based programs, the core equipment may include the capacity of the agency, staff training, facilitator skills, and even fidelity monitoring tools. And without these right tools for success, it can be really difficult to implement a program and produce the positive outcomes. But there may be also options for this equipment, like using a wooden spoon or an electric mixer. Just as equipment and available resources may vary across implementing sites. And similarly, just as the cake mixture can be baked in different size tins, so too can the program be delivered by different team structures. But remember that any change in this equipment must still be able to achieve the desired outcomes specified. And then finally, once you've mastered the basic recipe, the core cake can be used as a base for many variations and flavors of cakes. So you can vary the cake's flavor or adjust the design by adding a few ingredients. Or as I mentioned, you can adjust the shape for a particular group or occasion. But overall, the core components will remain unchanged. And this also applies when you're adapting evidence-based programs. Your suggested variations should involve adding but not subtracting components. So this may be achieved, for example, by incorporating additional resources or representative staffing to support a cultural group, or even adding evaluations and guides. Just as you may need to alter the amount of time or amount of included ingredients or baking time when making a cake at higher altitudes, so too may community settings also require you to adapt your materials or session lengths to meet participant needs. But most importantly, any variations should always align with the program's theory of change. So that's it for the basic plain cake model. Before we move on to our final model today, does anyone have any questions about that? Perfect. So our final adaptation model for today, which we will use momentarily in our small breakout group sessions, is the traffic light model. And this was originally designed to guide adaptations of sexual health programs, but it has now been more broadly distributed to assist implementers with selecting adaptations for all programs. And this model really offers a helpful analogy for differentiating different types of program adaptations, from those that are recommended to those that may ultimately increase program effectiveness. So similarly to a traffic light, this model specifies adaptations as either red, which are adaptations that are not endorsed and should not be implemented, yellow, which are changes to programs that produce unknown effects and may decrease your program's effectiveness, or green light changes that improve program outcomes and program participant fit. And as I mentioned, we will be working closely with this model today in our breakout rooms to help you really grasp these concepts.
So again, to make up for the Zoom polling portion of this workshop, we ask that you once again pause this video and assign traffic light colors according to the traffic light model for adaptations while considering the following scenarios. First, is changing the health behavior model or program theory considered a red light change that should not be attempted or pursued, a yellow light change where you cannot be entirely sure of its impact on program outcomes, or a green light change that is okay to proceed with? Second, is assigning a module as homework to make up for lost time considered a red, yellow, or green light change? And finally, are changing images to be more culturally appropriate considered a red, yellow, or green light change? So please pause the video now and record your answers.
We'll start off today with these red light changes, which, as I mentioned, should be avoided at all costs, as these changes have been proven to decrease the program's impact. And red light changes consist of any changes to the core components of the intervention, which ultimately alter the theory of change. And some examples of red light changes may include deleting lessons or activities, decreasing the length or number of program sessions, removing program components, or by changing the delivery format, program goals, or topic of a lesson or activity. And it does appear that most of you actually got this traffic color right for the Zoom poll question by assigning changing the health behavior model or program theory as a red light change, and that is correct. And one of the most commonly cited reasons that lead to red light changes are a lack of time or competing time demands, which, as we discussed earlier, is extremely common. But other reasons for making red light changes may also include difficulty retaining, engaging, or recruiting participants, or a lack of fit with community needs. And as I've mentioned, you and your implementation team should do your best to avoid implementing red light adaptations when possible. And these changes can be avoided by being aware. Simply know the common reasons for red light changes, as this will help you to navigate these circumstances before they become a barrier to program implementation. And be resourceful. Many of the reasons that were just mentioned for red light changes will be mentioned in a minute for yellow light changes. So when possible, try using all available resources to implement yellow versus red light changes. And as I mentioned, time is precious yet sparse. So be sure you're communicating as a team throughout the entire organization to allocate enough time to implement your program as intended. Working as a team helps to build cohesion, which not only boosts program outcomes, but organizational goals and outcomes as well. So really work to make decisions as a team and keep your tasks aimed towards a common goal. And remember, red light adaptations are not effective. So now let's discuss a little bit about yellow light adaptations. And these are any changes or modifications to program components or contents. But note, unlike red light changes, these yellow light changes only include adding or modifying material, but not removing it. However, it should also be noted that yellow light adaptations, like red light changes, typically decrease program effectiveness. So they should really be approached with caution, because without proper evaluation, the impacts of these changes on program outcomes are unknown. And some examples of yellow light changes are adding resources to connect participants to further assistance, increasing the length or number of sessions, changing the delivery setting or the program's evaluation tools, tailoring materials to fit participants' beliefs, or assigning a module as homework to make up for lost time, which was split about half and half. And yellow light adaptations can be really tricky in this way. We typically tend to refer to them as more blue or adjusting the color, because they will bleed into those green and red light changes. So we are here to help you with navigating that if you ever need. And as I mentioned previously, most of these common reasons align with those for red light adaptations, but there is another common reason for yellow light adaptations that was not previously mentioned, and that's lack of space to implement the full program as intended. And to prevent yellow light changes, you should, again, be aware of the common reasons just mentioned to help guide you in decisions that are least likely to decrease program effectiveness. You should also select programs that are a good fit for your unique community, ideally before implementing. Remember that no one knows your community better than you, so be sure to consistently work as a team to review your program's adaptations to ensure that they relate to community members' needs and your organization's goals. Also know your program by understanding the logic models and the theories that drive your evidence-based program. This is a critical step to identifying which components are critical and which may be modified. So be sure that all members of your implementation team take the time to learn the theory of change. And also ensure that all implementers receive program-specific training and take advantage of technical assistance opportunities and resources when available. And finally, we'll close out this model today by discussing green light changes, which are minor changes to programs that will likely increase reach, receptivity, and participation. And most importantly, these changes are least likely to negatively impact your program outcomes. And in fact, they may even potentially enhance the results. And some examples of these adaptations may include name changes to the program, lessons, or activities to match cultural backgrounds, and even changing the pictures to reflect the community culture or developmental level of participants, which it seems that most of you got correct today. So, and it can also involve tailoring the program's language to be more culturally appropriate, updating health information and statistics, or changing the level of health literacy to fit your participants' needs, which I know was mentioned in that word cloud we did earlier, or even including culturally appropriate terms and materials. And the most common reasons that lead to green light adaptations are similar to the examples we just mentioned, so I won't really spend time reviewing those again here, but I will share these slides with you today so that you will have this information. And as I previously mentioned, making these types of changes to your evidence-based programs is generally okay as long as they are responding to participants' deepest needs. However, you should still connect with your program developer before making any program changes. But if the program developer is not available to you, at least reach out to a technical assistance professional like us here at the PRC to receive assistance. And remember, all adaptations require extra time to dedicate to meeting with your team and TA professionals, as well as evaluating any changes. Overall, the focus when making program changes should be on working towards making them as accommodating as possible, while ensuring that you're still following best practices. But regardless, ensure that you always connect, either with the program developer or a TA professional before adapting. So now I know that was a lot of information just given to you, and I would like to take a moment to mention that all of this traffic light information that I just shared can be found in our PRC created research to practice tools, Adaptations Part 1 and Part 2. And Nikki has just shared PDF copies of these tools for your review in the chat now. And you may find these really helpful as we divide into our breakout chats momentarily to further discuss causes and best practices of implementing adaptations according to this traffic light model.
So now that you have all of this information, we ask that you once again pause this recording for about 10 minutes or so and consider one of the following adaptations. So the first adaptation you may select is, our implementation team is currently sharing a Google document that includes all program lessons with clickable links that include information and resources to enrich lessons in our program and to make the content more relevant. The next adaptation you may consider is, our implementation team uses more current and sometimes additional data and statistics than what is presented in some of the original program lessons for our program. And then the following adaptation up for consideration is, our implementation team is currently implementing a program to a broader age range than it was originally designed for. The program's curriculum was designed for a second grade developmental level. However, the program is currently being implemented with higher and lower grade levels than it was originally intended. Then, after you have selected one of these adaptations, please consider and respond to the following questions. Given the information just shared about the traffic light model for adaptations, would you consider this adaptation to be a red, yellow, or green light change? Why would you classify this adaptation as a red, yellow, or green light adaptation? What community needs or features may have prompted this adaptation? What are some alternative options that could have possibly been implemented? And finally, consider how could these other potential adaptations also impact implementation fidelity. So please pause the video now for about 10 minutes and select one of the 3 presented adaptations, then record your responses to the questions that were just provided.
We all definitely know that you're a little bit frustrated when it comes to balancing fidelity and adaptations to evidence-based programs. And as I mentioned, that's totally normal. Because this pressure of implementing programs with strict fidelity and the need to implement adaptations to meet community needs is stressful. But again, that's why we're here, and we would love to help you in any way that we can. So to quickly review, just ensure that all implementers are monitoring implementation fidelity, utilizing all of the program specified evaluation tools. And we have made sure that those are posted onto the implementation toolbox for all of you here today who are implementing an evidence-based program. However, if you are not implementing an evidence-based program, the PRC has also created both a self and observer fidelity monitoring tool, and that can also be found on the implementation toolbox. Additionally, you should use these findings from your fidelity measures to meet and communicate as a team and ask the questions, from these tools, what areas have been identified as needing the most support? How can we work as a team to improve our fidelity score? What adaptations are currently being implemented? And what areas of fidelity may be suffering due to these current adaptations? And then take these results and discuss any potential future adaptations and current adaptations to ensure that they align with the best practices that we've discussed here today. Remember, as Dave's group highlighted again, that being proactive is extremely beneficial. Additionally, before, during, and after program implementation, you should ensure that all implementers are trained in the program model, as NIKKI had mentioned, and that there is an internal mechanism of ongoing support to help build buy-in and sustainability, and that an internal monitoring system is created to provide corrective feedback regarding implementation. Remember to communicate with all implementing members and key organizational staff members to avoid bias, allow diversity in adaptation decisions, understand your agency's implementation weaknesses and strengths, and also be sure to communicate with your stakeholders and broader community, which we'll be getting more into in our next learning workshop. You should also work as a team to set realistic versus unrealistic expectations for all program staff and ensure that all implementing staff participate in periodic training sessions. Also, collaborate continuously with your implementers, program developers, and technical assistance professionals before, during, and after implementation to ensure that best practices are followed and to determine how your proposed changes may impact program outcomes. Remember, it's always best to start this collaboration process sooner rather than later. Always work to implement adaptations proactively, and you can do this by meeting as a team to propose each adaptation, then seeking guidance from your program manual and program developers or TA professional. Then you'll meet again as a team to agree on the adaptation and how to best proceed. And then you want to continuously meet as a team to regularly evaluate and reassess the adaptation's impact on program outcomes and goals. Also ensure that you are implementing green light changes that are most likely to improve program outcomes or at least not detract from them. And once again, just to bring it on home, always discuss any and all adaptations with a team, ideally before implementing them, and consistently come together to reevaluate, because we cannot be entirely sure how adaptations to evidence-based programs will impact the outcomes and effectiveness. So just work as a team and implement with care, caution, and knowledge. And of course, One final best practice method that I will leave you with today is to always document and to the best of your abilities evaluate all adaptations made and the reasons for making them. And this is actually something that could really benefit the prevention science field as a whole, so that we can learn why you as implementers are making adaptations and assist with this process. And there are many different ways of doing this. If you have funds, a management information system, or MIS, is a great way to do this. And this will help you to monitor program implementation processes, costs, and pre and post test outcome measures. However, if you don't currently have the funds to do this, just be sure that you're consistently documenting any changes through an Excel spreadsheet or other type of document that is widely shared with and accessible to the entire implementation team. Ideally, you should be documenting when adaptations are being made, why they are being made, what they consist of, and how they align with the program's goal and theory. And you should also evaluate all of these items to the best of your ability. And this can be done by using pre and post evaluation tools as prescribed by the program's manual and determining if the adapted version of the program is having a similar impact as the original evidence-based program did. However, if funds or resources are available, you should ideally hire a program evaluation expert who can conduct a rigorous examination of all adaptations and their impacts on outcomes. And finally, treat adaptations to your programs as natural experiments with an opportunity to learn. If the adaptation is not effective, it does not mean that you have failed as an implementer. Just take these adaptations that did not work or impeded outcomes as lessons learned and determine if they were potentially yellow or red light changes that negatively impacted the program's underlying theory of change. When it comes to adapting your program to meet community needs, lead with inquisitiveness versus a fear of being judged. As long as you have sound justification and rationale for the adaptation and it is well planned out and follows best practices, attempt it and learn from the outcomes. Remember that the thing with making evaluations is that we don't really know, adaptations, not evaluations, is that we don't really know how these changes are going to impact the program outcomes. So sometimes you just have to jump in with adaptations, give it a go, and learn from the evaluation. But just carefully and consistently document as much as possible about these changes. And that's all of the material I have for you today. I know that was a lot. So as we finish up, Nikki will post my email into the chat if you would like to reach out to me with any questions, concerns, or comments. I hope that you found today useful. Just a quick note, we have received approval from the Prevention Specialist Certification Board for your participation in this and the upcoming workshop to be documented as hours towards your Prevention Specialist certification. So shortly after this workshop and completion of the post-workshop survey, you will receive an email with a certificate for that. And I know that we're running short on time, so if you need to go, I understand, but Nikki will be posting a link to our post-workshop survey into the chat. I do ask that you really please complete this, as it will assist us with crafting the future learning workshop, which will be hosted February 23rd from 11 to 12:30. And this workshop will talk more in depth about adapting your programs to meet cultural needs and strengths. So if you or members of your implementation team are interested, please consider joining us for our fourth and final learning workshop on the 23rd. Nikki has also posted the registration link into the chat for any of you who wish to register now. Also, as I mentioned several times, please take the opportunity to check out our implementation toolbox if you haven't already.